Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us today for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Today's a very special day. First of all, it's all good martinis. And secondly, Jim Garrity is in studio with me. So Jim, first you were half a world away in Spain, and now we're just a wall or two apart here. So welcome.
An iron curtain has descended between the two of us as we... People wonder, why is Jim in the studio? Are they doing a special interview with somebody today? No, not today. It's because the power is out of my house because they're still fixing the roof from the tree. Not that I'm bitter about that. You know, it's I'm starting to understand how Boston felt about the big dig, but that's okay. That's great. I'm raring to go today, Greg.
Today, again, all good martinis. We're going to take a look at the numbers who are reportedly self-deporting as a result of the Trump administration's policies. We're also going to be looking at the California population's blowback towards Gavin Newsom and his effort to balance things out, as he would say it, in response to the Texas redistricting effort. And we're going to have some fun at the expense of the Chinese military, which is always fun. But Jim, before we get into all of that, today is the Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. And since it's in Alaska, it's going to be a late start, and we won't know how the summit goes. But we have a pretty good idea of how the Russians are coming into the summit, because the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, walked into his hotel with a sport coat on, but under the sport coat was a CCCP sweatshirt or sweater, which is, their version of USSR. And it doesn't take a genius to remember that Ukraine was under the umbrella of the USSR. So maybe there'll be a breakthrough today, but the odds don't look good.
Yeah, I mean, look, you could characterize that. I'm glad you lay out for our younger listeners that, CCCP meant the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Basically, those four letters are a two-letter message to the United States, and the first one is F, and I'll let you get what the second letter is. I also am reminded of the sheer number of people who blew a gasket when Zelensky did not wear a suit to the Oval Office meetings, both with Biden and with Trump. Zelensky stopped wearing a suit when the war began, saying, I'm a wartime leader now. This is kind of a sign that I am no longer in the traditional role, and this is a different, time. You can argue with that sartorial decision or not. I don't think he was intending to insult the United States by showing up in his traditional gray, military style outfit. But if fine, okay, you don't like that. This, I've yet to see anybody, and that just happened. I suppose as the day goes on, some of the same people who were tearing their hair out over Zelensky's choices could get upset about this, but I'm not counting on it. I'll write my first tweet on this. Everyone's like, no, it's totally different because he's not asking for money, and it's totally different because he's not sending a message. It was laundry day. This was what was clear. Every conceivable excuse for Lavrov is being made by some folks because I think in the end there are people who want to blame Ukraine for being invaded. There are people who, in the end, they want to root for the bully, and thus they will excuse whatever the bully is doing. As I lay out in today's Morning Jolt, I have no idea what's going to come out of this summit. I'm not particularly optimistic, but I'm wishing the president well. As President Ronald Reagan said about dealing with the Soviet Union, trust but verify. Joe Biden ran around saying, I got the Russians to agree to an extension of the START treaty. And then, the moment it became inconvenient for Russia, they just ignored it. And so, if Putin promises something, I know this is going to shock everybody out there, it's conceivable that he will not keep his promises. So don't think that, please, whatever happens, Mr. President, please do not hold up an agreement and say, peace in our time, peace in our time. Bad precedent there.
No doubt about it. Although I will point out that the last time most of us saw CCCP was on the jacket of Ivan Drago in Rocky IV. Big win for the Americans that day. The Gorbachev lookalike applauded Rocky's speech about how it's better that two guys were slugging it out instead of 20 million. Obviously, Reagan's policies were a major factor in ending the Cold War, but let's not diminish Rocky Balboa's role. Just 6 years later, Gorbachev is dissolving the Soviet Union. You can call it a coincidence. I don't think so.
I don't think it's coincidence. And also, you think CCCP, wasn't that on the uniforms of the Russian hockey team back in 1980?
Also,
all right.
Yes.
So, yep. I mean, I look at that. That's a loser's uniform. But whatever you want to call it. You wear what you want to wear, Sergei.
Let's talk about Brooklyn bedding. Hopefully all the negotiators got an excellent night's sleep last night. I know I did, as did Mrs. Columbus, on our new mattress from Brooklyn Bedding. We got this last week once we finally lugged it up the stairs, because it was not a light mattress, but it inflated because it was vacuum packed. It was fun to watch that. And we have had great sleep ever since. Really impressed. We got the Aurora Lux cooling mattress. We also got the medium firmness, but you can get whatever firmness level you want. And there's lots of different choices of mattress that you can get. We are thrilled with our choice.
Brooklyn Bedding knows that sleep is not one size fits all. That's why they offer mattresses for everybody with every sleep style, even in hard to find sizes. If you're not sure which mattress is right for you, take the Brooklyn Bedding sleep quiz and find your perfect match, and you can finish it in less than 2 minutes. Now, Brooklyn Bedding also offers a 120-night comfort trial. That's like 4 months. You really have no excuse at that point. You should know darn well whether the mattress is good for you. Love it, or they will help you return or swap it hassle-free.
Yeah, and Brooklyn Bedding, all of it's made right here in the U.S. in their Arizona factory. No middlemen, no gimmicks. So go to brooklynbedding.com and use our promo code 3ML at checkout to get 30% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. That's brooklynbedding.com and the promo code 3ML for 30% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name, 3 Martini Lunch, of course, after checkout so they know that we sent you. All right, on to our first good martini here, Jim. And, we talked about Rocky, but another big issue in the 80s, of course, was pro wrestling. We talked about it some with the passing of Hulk Hogan back in the day. One of the fun things you'd watch back in pro wrestling is when a couple of heels would jump a popular guy, and one guy would hold him, and the other guy would come with the folding chair, and then the good guy would slip the hold, and then the bad guy would hit the other bad guy with the folding chair. Well, that's kind of what happened in the South China Sea here lately. You might be better at setting this up than I do, but a close contact of yours found that 2 Chinese ships ran into each other while trying to harass a smaller Filipino ship, because, of course, China's trying to encroach further and further and further south in those waters. And so, it's not going to derail China's ambitions, unfortunately, but a little bit of egg on the face for a obviously very egotistical regime is always good.
Sure. Ray Powell is the director of Sea Light and the co-host of the podcast, Why Should We Care About the Indo-Pacific? He's kind of turning into my Pacific guy, paying attention to what's going on in this very pivotal, very important part of the world that doesn't always get a lot of attention here in the U.S. media. Well, if you have followed it all, you probably do know that the Chinese Navy, the Chinese Coast Guard, and even some Chinese private sector ships have been encroaching further and further into other countries' territorial waters, and they kind of get, China believes where its territorial waters extend very differently from what international law and what other countries believe their territorial waters extend. So you end up with these often Coast Guard ships, rarely full-on Navy ships, but sometimes you get Navy versus Coast Guard, and they sail closer and closer to each other, almost often in kind of a game of chicken or something like that, in an attempt to assert territorial authority, intimidation, kind of challenging. No one so far has wanted this to turn into an all-out shooting war or something, but sometimes they spray water cannons at each other. It's brinksmanship. It's aggression. And in the recent conflict involving with the Philippines, a Philippine Coast Guard ship and 2 Chinese vessels were all bearing down on each other. Unfortunately, the Chinese vessels weren't careful in calculating who was going in which direction, and the 2 Chinese vessels collided. And I believe there was a report that they were doing search and rescue operations because of that. Now, we don't laugh at the suffering of anybody, even Chinese sailors, but this is a sign that maybe China shouldn't do this, right? This is, we see this, by the way, over airspace, both in Taiwan. Sometimes you see this with Russian fighters over our airspace near Alaska, near the border between NATO countries and Russia. So, this is generally a bad idea. This is generally a bad idea because when you put, that many vessels or that many planes in that kind of close proximity, there is a chance that you're going to have collisions. And in fact, I believe one of our Reaper drones was knocked down over in the Black Sea in international airspace by a Russian fighter about a year or 2 ago. This is a bad idea. This is how things get hurt. Insert the Fred Thompson line. This stuff is going to get out of control, and we're lucky if we live through it. Nobody wants to have an all-out shooting war get started because of this kinds of brinksmanship and kind of, robust, aggressive assertion of territorial authority that is in violation of international law. So it just seems karmic. It just seems like the Chinese were pushing their luck. Ironically, if they'd only had one ship in that situation, they would not have had a collision between their two ships. So, I once read, Greg, and I'm sure some listener out there can either verify or break this, that the first two automobiles in the state of Ohio crashed into each other. Now, you think about it, they have an entire state. There's not a lot other. Theoretically, they should have had plenty of room. Somehow they crashed into each other. I don't know about you, Greg. I was shocked that was not the case for the first two Maryland drivers. For those of you not in the Capital Beltway, Maryland drivers, basically they're Northern Florida drivers. That's the best way of explaining all of it. Each state is just going to get more and more irked with me over the course of this podcast. But so like the fact that China has had this really unfortunate event involving two of their ships, maybe that will teach them a lesson, and maybe we'll see a little bit less brinksmanship from them in the near future.
Yeah, and they were saying on the podcast there that the bow of one of those Chinese ships pretty much got smushed in. So this wasn't some like little love tap.
There's video, and it's not.
Collision, yeah.
These are traveling at high speed, which is like you'd figure if they were going slower, they'd say, "Hey, there's one of our buddies is over there. We probably should steer in the other direction," which they did not.
Now, right about the time you left for Spain, there were rumors. I never saw them on one of the sites that was credible enough to actually go with as a martini, that China was massing troops in the province closest to the Taiwan Straits. Have you heard anything about that? I know most rumors suggest it's 26, 27, 28 maybe when they're thinking about doing this, and they usually stick to their plan, but any truth to those rumors?
I would say in the past year or two, and I try to check in with a whole bunch of folks who really follow the China-Taiwan issue better than I do. And I'll just say, hey, what's going on? What's your feeling on things? And I'd say, like in the past year, they're less convinced about an invasion happening. Certainly less convinced about an invasion happening anytime soon, and less convinced about maybe one will ever happen. But with that said, they are less confident about Taiwanese unity and resolve, and the idea that at some point, whether through a economic pressure, through a embargo, or blocking the shipping lanes or something like that, they do wonder at some point they'll just create this atmosphere of an inevitability, and Taiwan will begin to be willing to talk about dropping its independence. Now, that could change. This is not a definite certainty. Not every American who goes to Taiwan comes away convinced that they totally get it with the degree of threat that they are under. Or they kind of think that, there may be an element of denial going on there. So I did notice that change, and I thought it was kind of curious. I don't know if that's a Trump factor. I don't know if that's a other factor. China's had its own economic problems. Maybe they don't feel as confident about their ability to economically support themselves if they were dealing with the consequences that would come from an attempted invasion. So we'll see. But this is a part of the world that we should keep an eye on, and it's probably maybe a bit more consequential than, say, the Gaza Strip.
All right. Well, if you want to stop that other ship from hitting you, maybe you call them on the intercom or whatever other communications channels you have. And if you're running a business, you know that every time you miss a call, you're leaving money on the table. And when every customer conversation matters, you need a phone system that keeps up and helps you stay connected. And that's why you need Open Phone.
Open Phone is the #1 business phone system that streamlines and scales your customer communications. It works through an app on your phone or computer, so you no longer have to carry around 2 phones or use a landline. With Open Phone, your team can share one number and collaborate on customer calls and texts like a shared inbox. That way, any teammate can pick up right where the last person left off, keeping your response times faster than ever.
Open Phone is now offering 3 Martini Lunch listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/3ml. That's openphone.com/3ml. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Jim, a little bit of an update on the Democrats flailing in the face of the Texas Republicans' redistricting efforts. It looks like the Texas Democrats are going to be heading home soon and accepting defeat. But one of the reasons they're going to do that and allow Republicans to pass the new maps, which supposedly would give Republicans +5 compared to what they have right now, in the House of Representatives delegation is because California now is planning to move forward with adding 5 Democrat seats by redrawing their maps. The only difference, of course, is that Texas can do this legally, whether you think it's a good idea or not. They can do it legally. California cannot because they have this independent redistricting commission, but Gavin Newsom wants to override that. He's got to submit it as a ballot measure this November. But Gavin Newsom launching this effort yesterday because, of course, defying Trump is a lot easier than actually fixing your own state.
You have the power on November 4th to stand up for people that are being bullied. You have the power to stand up for people that are being intimidated. You have the power to stand up to the rule of law. We're giving the people of this state the power to save democracy, not just in California, but all across the United States of America.
Did you notice the Freudian slip there? It wasn't standing up for the rule of law. It was standing up to the rule of law, which is appropriate because that's exactly what he's doing by flouting the laws in his state. Now, the good news here, because we mentioned this was all good martinis, is that the voters of California are not in favor of this at all. In fact, a new poll shows that only 36% of Californians support what Gavin Newsom is doing, and 64% do not. They want to keep the independent commissions. Independent voters were the most enthusiastic backers of keeping things the way they are, with 72% in favor of the commission keeping its line-drawing authority. Support among Republicans and Democrats was roughly equal, 66 and 61% respectively. So, when there are specific circumstances, the voters might look at it a little differently as opposed to just in general. But Jim, that's a pretty lopsided number in the face of Governor Newsom here.
Well, when you say the rule of law, Greg, the Independent Commission for Redistricting is in the California state constitution. They put that there like probably a couple decades ago. So this is not some recent law that they need to undo. This is like a basic fundamental thing that's been part of Cal, and everybody left, right, and center thought this was a good idea back then, right? So that's issue one, is that you actually have to change the Constitution in order to undo this, and this is effectively what Newsom is asking people to do. Secondly, is anyone kind of baffling by the fact that he's saying we need to save democracy by gerrymandering to make it even more clear that Democrats are going to win these races? Gerrymandering, I think in a perfect world, you'd have lots of competitive seats, and that way, when the country is frustrated with the party in power, you would have more seats shift. And, but both parties do this. And I think it's kind of absolutely baffling that, that not only is Gavin Newsom turning this into his crusade, I'm sorry, I'm not being sensitive, his jihad, that because he wouldn't want to be associated with crusaders. That's too right wing for him. That this is his cause. Right? The other guy who has turned this into his cause on Meet the Press this past weekend is J.B. Pritzker of Illinois. Now, if you want to find like the 2 most gerrymandered states in the country, right? And so the idea is I think there's there's 50 some seats in California. Republicans have in the teens, even though they get 40 some percent of the vote, and they're going to get 5 out of the 50 some at the end of this under these proposed, redrawing. But so Newsom gets into these dumb fights on Twitter or on X. He should not do this, but at one point he pointed to other states that have a majority, I think it was one of the Dakotas, and the problem is that the Dakotas have 1 seat. So you can't say gerrymandering. The state lines are what you're objecting. Take it up with the founding fathers. Take it up when they drew the state lines. That's how this happens there. But the other point that I feel like is important here, I would prefer if no state did mid-decade redistricting. I think you do the census, you get the new data. The Census Bureau says here's how the population is. Here's how many congressional seats you get. These states, sorry, bad news, you're losing 1. These states, good news, you've gained population, you're gaining a seat. In some cases, you're gaining 2 seats. And then you'd redraw the lines. So I don't love what's going on in Texas, but let's also point out that the gain that they're going to get is not going to put the House of Representatives, give you a permanent Republican House of Representatives forever. The other thing is that people move, right? Your district goes from being pretty darn Republican leaning to less Republican leaning over the course of the decade, and vice versa for other districts. And the second thing that's really important out of this, so the census in 2020 wasn't great. Pandemic's going on. You've got this giant unexpected event that is complicating it. There are some people who say this is the Census Bureau deliberately screwing it up. I don't think that's the case. I think this is just routine complications of dealing with an unprecedented situation. But the Census Bureau then does this thing they call the post survey, where they basically go down and they reach out to a random sample, I think tens of thousands of households. and they say, hey, how many people live there? And they check the answers they get there and the response rates they get from that to the response rates they got during the pandemic. And unsurprising, every year they find like, oh, based on this, we overcounted a bit here, we undercounted a bit there. And generally, it kind of is a wash and it's not significant. Well, in this one, I know it's going to shock you, but a whole bunch of states had an undercount and 5 of the 6 were red states and were Republican leaning. I think 8 states had a overcount, 6 of them were blue states. And so you're like, oh, wait, because first of all, problem number 1 is like, you figure it would all be a wash. But the fact that it was not a wash and Republican states were the ones that were getting shortchanged, that's not good. Hans over at the Heritage Fund, the good Hans, as we call him over here on the 3 Martini Lunch, ran the numbers and he said, look, based on this, Florida should have gotten at least 1 more House seat and probably 2. Well, under Republican-run government in Florida, you're probably going to get 1 more Republican House seat of that. Same thing in Texas. Texas-controlled government, they should have gotten at least 1 more. I believe it was Minnesota should have lost 1. I believe it was Rhode Island should have lost 1. And Colorado got a seat that he argues, under the revised numbers, it should not have gotten. So you run those numbers, Republicans should have probably 2 more Republican-leaning seats in Florida and Texas. Democrats should have 2 less and maybe a third less one in Colorado. So, when Republicans do this change in Texas, is it, are they trying to maximize their partisan? Yeah. Would I prefer they're not doing this mid-decade? Yeah. But they're trying to fix a mistake that the U.S. Census Bureau did. And again, I don't want to blow my stack here on a Friday, Greg, but what's the job of the Census Bureau?
Count people.
Right? Like, that's your job. You have 1 job, right? You have one job, and that you couldn't do that very well, So I think there's some reason for Republicans. They have a fair objection here. We got screwed out of a couple of seats we should be having. So that's why we're doing this redistricting. If you think it's justified, you don't. But the idea that California, we only have 30-some Democrats in our state delegation. This is how we should have 45 or nearly 50. Come on, like that's utterly absurd. And of all the people in the world who could lead the charge on this, J.B. Pritzker, rising out of his chair and running or walking to lead the charge, trotting. Maybe anyway, you can just tell he's excited. He's short of breath when he talks about this, and people are like, "Oh, Jim's going to make weight jokes," And Gavin Newsom are the 2 people who are least qualified to lead the charge on the gerrymandering argument.
Yeah, well, those are 2 governors who will do anything to distract from their actual job performance, whether it's vagrancy, whether it's the fires in California, whether it's just obscene tax rates and high crime and just the awfulness that Chicago has turned into.
People moving out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. In addition to the hypocrisy, I mean, Gavin Newsom is he is mimicking Trump's all-cap tweets to try and troll Trump. They're not as good as Trump's troll tweets. But Gavin Newsom, we're kind of wise to your game at this point. Anyway, let's talk about Oracle and your business. What does the future hold for business? You can ask 9 experts and you get 10 answers because there's a lot of things we just don't know yet. What will the market continue to do? Will it be a bull market, bear market? What will interest rates do? A lot of talk about that. Is inflation headed up or down? Well, until then, more than 42,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP platform. Wait, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform.
With real-time insults. No! 3, 2, 1. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. And when you're closing the books in days instead of weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time focusing on what's next. Now, whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities.
Yeah, business owners and experts will tell you got to let the AI do the things that the AI actually does well, and no program does it better than NetSuite by Oracle. And speaking of opportunity, you can download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/martini. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/martini. Again, netsuite.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our 3rd good martini now. And for that, we tip the hat to Town Hall and Katie Pavlich, who flagged this story. But it was announced by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem that nearly 2 million illegal aliens have self-deported since President Donald Trump took office in January. Officially, Noem says that 1.6 million illegal immigrants have left the United States. And she says under President Trump, we now have safer streets, better jobs for Americans, and less strain on schools. Now, of course, shortly after taking office, there was also a number of incentives given to illegals to leave voluntarily. They'd get a free flight. I think there was $1,000, I don't know if per head or per family. And so a lot of these people seem to be taking him up on it. And of course, they have the opportunity, I guess, to get in the back of the line in their country of origin and maybe come back here if they want to. But order is being restored. We had Joe Biden, of course, even before he was elected, saying no deportations first 100 days, which of course led to a massive influx of people, which never stopped. It was just absolutely out of control. Intentionally so. I mean, made no effort until he thought he was running for re-election in 2024 to actually slow the tide. Trump comes in, immediately the numbers absolutely plummet. The last few months, 0 people officially getting into the country, but even encounters at the border in July, between 46 and 4,700. There were well over 10,000 a day in the Biden administration. So just absolutely ridiculous. And so change in policy, change in presidency, Jim, clearly works.
You know, you can different people will put different dates on when illegal immigration became a major topic in American politics. I think a lot of folks might go all the way back to the mid-'90s, Pete Wilson, the propositions out in California. But clearly, George W. Bush, it's been growing. It has been becoming a steadily increase. And during that entire time, there's been this fundamental argument about these people who've come across the border illegally. Who are they and what do they want? And generally from the left, you heard these very emotionally evocative stories about how they're people who want to be, they're Americans in every way except what's, I think Obama described Americans in every way except what's on their passport, which is kind of important. That's you know, right. They're Americans in every way except the legal way. That seems like a little detail that you cannot just hand wave away. But the idea was the idea that they wanted political freedom, that they wanted to live the American dream. And you do wasn't it amazing, Greg, that every kid across the border became a valedictorian? It was, it's easy to get very cynical about this. No doubt some segment of that group would meet that definition. But there was also this argument generally from folks on the right and people who are more immigration restriction. It's like, no, a lot of these people are coming here for economic opportunity. And we have, 40-some guest worker programs? Like, it's not impossible to get a temporary permit to come to the United States and work. Whether you want to be a seasonal fruit picker or you want a summer job at summer camps, or, you can find people who are in the country temporarily, legally, doing work, and because they say, I just want to come here, make some money, and then go back to my home country. Large number of the people who are in the country illegally, working on farms, working in meatpacking plants, working in hotels, all this kind of stuff. By and large, they were sending back a lot of money back to their home, to their families in the form of remittances. The Trump administration has attempted the idea of raising taxes on that. But if you're here for economic opportunity, look, I think we can all relate to that. But that also means that you're in no particular danger if you return to your home country. Or this is, and we have, as I said, there are legal ways to do this. You've just decided that's too much of a hassle, too much of a paperwork, and you don't want to wait to do that. And it becomes much harder to be sympathetic with the idea that there's some sort of grand injustice in returning to the country that you're legally supposed to be living in. Well, if there's a chance that, ICE is going to kick down your door, or that you're going to get arrested walking the street, or if you're going to get forcibly returned to your home country, if you're here, you've made some money, you've accumulated some savings, maybe it's time to go back to Mexico or Guatemala or El Salvador or any of these other countries all around the world. And there's no great tragedy in that. There's no great injustice in that. You got to do what you wanted to do. Come to the United States, not get caught, make some money under the table, and now you got some stuff. And in order to avoid getting arrested, and in order to avoid having a criminal record, you're going to go back to your home country. And conceivably, you want to, as you said, if you want to apply for legal immigration, a legal work status you can do that. This is a grand success, and this is also look. For a long time we saw the number 11 million thrown around. A lot of people have speculated for a long time that it's significantly higher than that. But that said, 1.6 million to 2 million people in a 6-month span, or a little bit more than that, that's a remarkable change. And so that's why this qualifies as a good martini. I don't know if you characterize this as a bitter aftertaste to it. Just observe When Rudy Giuliani effectively solved the crime problem in New York City, New York City did not say, "Wow, we love Republicans forever." They're like, "Oh, okay." When Republicans reformed welfare back in the mid 1990s, they took welfare as an issue off the table. We have long lamented the politicians who would rather have the issue to run on election cycle after election cycle than to actually pass legislation that it will address it. Maybe not address it as perfectly as they'd like, but So it's conceivable that in a couple of years, illegal immigration will not be a top-tier political issue because Donald Trump and the Republican Congress have effectively solved it through greater enforcement. Having said that, Greg, I'd like to have that problem.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And the left, just like we were talking about yesterday, instead of saying, "Oh, we have a smarter approach to this," talking about DC crime, what DC crime problem? On the illegal immigration problem, there were some rumblings right after the election that Democrats would be like, "Well, yeah, we need to get rid of the violent criminals, but let's Republicans, slow your roll on all the other illegals." Well, now, because it's Trump and because it's ICE, they'll protect even the most violent criminals. They won't hold them. There was just a story in Arizona, this guy who molested multiple kids, won't hold them. State won't even hold them and for ICE to show up because ICE is now, and Trump, of course, is the villain in their eyes. And so they're just stepping on just all these different rakes that they shouldn't in so many ways, which is great for the Republican Party and great to keep an increasingly radical Democratic Party out of power. But eventually, some of these people are going to get elected, and it could be pretty scary.
Greg, in the proud tradition of the fiery but mostly peaceful riots that we saw a couple of years ago, there was an illegal immigrant in New Jersey who had a mostly good driving record, other than the 5 DUIs and the fatal crash. Other than that, they killed 2 people. Other than that, think about all the miles he drove and he didn't kill anyone. When you see yourself making that argument, just stop. Insert the gif of Michael Jordan, that PSA. Stop it. Stop what you're doing. That sense of just
get some help.
Yeah, get some help. Because you don't want to argue that other than killing 2 people, he's been a safe driver. You know how many people most drivers have killed? 0, right? The moment you get to 1, you're an outlier, right? It's like when Alec Baldwin went on a rant about how terrible Trump voters are, and I'm like, do you know the average number of people that the Trump voter has killed? 0. Right? So, Alec, you're 1 above them, right? I mean, OJ's just 1 above him.
Gosh. Have a great weekend, everyone. Jim, great to have you in studio. See you Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us. They'd love to be listening, especially with material like today's. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a fantastic weekend. And again, join us on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.